Devolution plays very important roles insofar as African governance is concerned. More specifically, there are about 4 distinct roles which devolution serves. And the 4 roles are: 1, devolution is very critical for facilitating efficient development. Devolution is important for purposes of ensuring what we call accommodation of minorities and marginalized communities. Devolution also serves to ensure improvement and enhancements in democracy and accountability. And the last, or the 4th one, will be facilitating and enhancing checks and balances on the exercise of power. So those are 4 very critical roles that devolution plays in just generally and particularly in the context of Africa. When designing a devolved system of government, one of the questions which countries have to face is how many levels should our country have, or how many systems of levels within that system the country should have. Now, the thing about policy and governance is we do not have ideal forms of a structuring of a particular country. However, it's a matter of really asking what works for you as a country. For example, different countries have adopted different approaches to the whole structuring of the levels of government. If you look at, for example, a country like South Africa that has also devolved or multi-level system of government, it has 3 levels of government. It has the national government, the provincial government, and local government. When you look at a country like Nigeria, Nigeria is federal in name and also in terms of how it operates. Nigeria has 3 levels. It has the state level, it has the national level, it has the state level, and then it has the local government level. When you come back to Kenya, we have 2 levels of government. We have the national government and county governments. So essentially, there is no formula for deciding how many levels of government do you want to have. The most important thing is deciding what do we want each of these levels of government to do? What function are they going to serve in the devolved context for you to be able to say, then there's justification for us to have this number of levels of government. So the effectiveness of devolution in practice largely depends on the effectiveness of institutions. So depending on where a country is insofar as good governance and the rule of law is concerned, that will determine so much how effective your system or multi-level government is in practice. So on that level, you realize that when you look at the systems as they exist on paper in terms of the constitutional framework, there's a very close correlation between the South African system of government and the Kenyan system of government, the devolved system of government. However, when you look at how effective these systems are in practice, you realize that South Africa has made a lot of progress insofar as implementing their system of devolution, largely because they have institutions that work. There is more respect for the rule of law. And therefore, when laws are passed, when particular decisions are being made, there is a keen interest in ensuring that there is compliance with the Constitution. So institutions and good governance and the rule of law are critical in ensuring an effective implementation of a system of devolution. Very critical question about designing a devolved system of government is how then do you design how many units you're going to have horizontally across the country, and how are you going to demarcate the geographical boundaries of those particular units? Now, there is no also, as I said again, in governance, we don't have a particular ideal way of approaching a particular governance issue. So a lot depends on the history of the country. A lot depends on the composition of the country in terms of ethnicity, in terms of language, in terms of religion. And you realize that some countries adopt historical boundaries, right? So that's what we did in Kenya. Now, the unique thing about Kenya is that these historical boundaries did not just come to be. They were ethnically demarcated during the colonial periods of. So you realize that as much as our approach was to actually adopt what ordinarily used to be districts, this district had already been demarcated on the basis of ethnicity. So you realize that in some of the counties in Kenya, you will find an ethnic majority. Now, some countries, for example, Ethiopia, are very intentional about how they are demarcating the territorial units of the regions in Ethiopia. They're largely ethnic. They have embraced ethnicity as a basis for their devolved system of government or federal system of government. So a country has to look at what is our history, what are we trying to achieve, how easy is it going to be able to move people from one place to another and tell them, now you belong here, you don't belong here. And essentially, most countries work with already existing boundaries, only now demarcating them on the basis of the goals that they intend to achieve. The effects or the disadvantages of devolution, especially where the demarcation of the horizontal units is done on the basis of who are the ethnic majorities of these particular units. Because you see, for example, in Kenya, our thinking, by default, we ended up having those districts having ethnic majorities. Now, the problem with now devolution is that now you've given this ethnically majoritarian community or tribe or religion an area of governance, which means when it comes to now the composition of the civil service in that particular devolved unit, when it comes to, who is going to do what, jobs, and literally even the allocation of resources, is going to be done largely favoring the ethnic majority. Now, the problem of devolution now is that now you end up creating ethnic minorities within these small, devolved units. And you realize, like now, when you look at countries like Ethiopia, the result has been now these smaller ethnic minorities are now even coming out and saying, we also want our own devolved unit for us to be able to run and manage and benefit from. So when it comes to now deciding who does what in a devolved context, there's a principle in devolution or multi-level governance called subsidiarity. Subsidiarity means that if there's a decision that has to be made about service provision, about any particular government function, let that decision be made by the lowest level of government available, right? So that means that if a particular service needs to be provided, the question usually is which level is best placed to provide this service most effectively, right? And now that's where you realize that some services, like for example, health, agriculture, education, some of them you realize that they usually, and matters to do with language and culture, are usually left to lower levels of government because they're the closest to the people and they know what would work best for those people because of their proximity to the people. when there is a dispute as to who does what. Usually what happens is when the constitution is dividing the functions and powers, it says that this function goes to this level of government, this function goes to this level of government. But because you cannot possibly think of every single function that a government can play, there is a provision for reserve functions, residuary functions, which then, depending on how that system came into being, you say it's either going to be a national government function or a subnational government function, because you can't list everything. So those that are not listed, then they're assigned to a particular level of government under the constitution. Now, when it comes to the question of disputes, remember that as much as we have a devolved system of government, we are operating within one single country. And that means that if I am one level of government and I'm suing you, I'm going to pay people, lawyers, right? This is money which, if I did not have to sue you, I could have actually used to provide better services. Therefore, most countries, what they do is, instead of now engaging in antagonistic ways of resolving disputes, there is a very clear system of intergovernmental relations which is usually included in the constitutional text. That whenever there are disputes, we are one government, let's resolve them through these particular structures. And importantly, let's start by alternative means of resolving these disputes. And in the event these fail by any chance, then we can explore additional ways in which we can be able to resolve these disputes. So alternative measures of resolving intergovernmental disputes are recommended to ensure that, we don't end up now having an antagonistic way of governing a country. What most countries do is they set up intergovernmental relations institutions. In Kenya, we have a body called the Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee, which is intended to facilitate and support Kenya's intergovernmental relations structure. Now, you realize that when some counties are having challenges and disputes, they are mediated by the Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee. So when you have intergovernmental relations bodies that are charged with the mandate of facilitating and supporting that system of devolution, these bodies can also be granted the power to engage in mediation and other ways of resolving disputes before they can escalate to litigation and court actions. It depends, again, as I mentioned, when you are designing how many levels of government you want to have as a country within a devolved context, you may decide that these levels are going to be included in the constitution and their powers and functions specifically demarcated under the constitution. However, among these levels that are contained in the constitution, let's give them the power to be able to devolve further to ensure, because the goal really is efficient service provision, right? So it doesn't mean that if a particular service is best or can be best provided by another level of government beneath you, then it's possible for the law to prescribe or to allow these subnational units to be able to create further decentralized units. It's the case in Kenya.